It's always something. It's The Real Estate Show. Welcome to The Real Estate Show. My name is Rick Naples. I am the owner-broker of Zone Realty LLC. You zone your home. Something. It's defined as an unexpected event or something that wasn't prepared for. And I just used the word again in a sentence. In a real estate transaction, there's so many different ways for something to happen in a way that might derail the transaction. In other words, not make it to the closing. And on this show, I wanted to talk about some of those things. Now, something can happen that's unexpected, that you have no control over. Something could happen that maybe you did have control over, but you weren't prepared in the right way. Or there's always those somethings that just seem to appear that you are not prepared for. So let's talk about the buyer's side. I mean, what are some of the things that buyers do that may cause a transaction to not happen? Well, of course, let's assume that you've gone out, you've been pre-qualified, you found the house, you made an offer, and the offer has been accepted by the seller. We're now to the point of where we're putting together the mortgage in order to close on the property you wish to buy. So one of the things that's more common, something that comes up, is the bank, when trying to verify the information the buyer has supplied, finds that there are differences. Now, it's not necessarily meaning that the buyer fibbed or lied or stretched information on the application, but perhaps they wrote something, usually income, that can't be verified or would match. Now, a lot of us have taken side jobs, so we have additional income to our primary job, and sometimes the bank wants to include all that income together when they're doing their numbers to give you a mortgage. It might be difficult in order to submit that information, especially if that side job is on an independent contractor's basis. In other words, you don't get a paycheck. Perhaps it's, you do crafts and you sell them via the internet or something along those lines. So you don't really have a way in a paycheck stub to verify that income. So what happens in that case is the bank will only use the verifiable income amount. That may make it harder to get the mortgage you want to get. Another thing that happens is a lot of times people don't report their credit truthfully. Now, sometimes the bank will run a credit report and something comes up in that credit report that shows that it's not exactly the way the buyer reported it. In other words, there's a credit card debt that they forgot to mention, or a car loan, or perhaps, in some cases, they co-signed on someone else's loan and forgot about it because that someone else has been making payments on time. You have to remember that if you co-sign for someone, that is considered your debt because you're responsible for it. So even though you're not making payments and it's not affecting your overall living standard, you're still on the hook for that loan, so it's going to count. So those are some of the things that are some things that can happen during the application and mortgage process. Now, there's a bunch of other things that can go wrong too. For instance, the buyer can make demands to the seller that the seller is not willing to do. And that's an array of different things. This is where the realtors come into play, because a realtor will talk to the buyer once they get a home inspection about what things that should be done, can wait off, or those things that are immediate that need to be done in order to make the transaction go through. One of the common things that happens in an inspection report is the wording of the inspection report may scare the buyer away. You have to remember, home inspectors are truthfully relaying what they're seeing as they're going through the house based on their knowledge, building knowledge, code knowledges, and so on and so forth. And they're making recommendations of things that should be done. And sometimes a buyer realizes that maybe this house is just going to cost too much money to do the things that should be done on the home. And they may get frustrated and decide to back out. There's all kinds of things that could happen. There's some things that are out there. For the unknowns, well, what if you lose your job? What if you get ill and you can't work? What, as I've experienced, the buyer passes away during the process. There's all kinds of influences that can happen from the outside. Someone goes out and they make a huge purchase. You're all excited, you're buying a house, so you go out and you buy furniture, or you buy that new car, or you spend some money and you go on a vacation so you can be nice and relaxed to come home and move into your house. And all those things will affect your debt ratio, which may stop you from getting the mortgage. Let's take a look at this presentation on some things that buyers may do which will cause a transaction to fall apart. I'm talking here on the Real Estate Show about something. It's always something. Something can happen. A real estate transaction is actually a small miracle when it comes together, because there's a number of people that are involved that all play an important part in making the deal happen so that you can close on your new home. And things can go wrong in that process. You can have someone along the lines that doesn't do what they're supposed to be doing when they need to do it, and it causes delays. We also know that there's outside influences that are not of your control. Until you get your mortgage and lock into your rate, there's always the chance that interest rates can go up, and we've seen that just recently. So what happens if your debt-to-income ratio and everything that's done by the bank to qualify you for the mortgage is done at one particular level, and then the interest rate jumps up 0.5 point or 0.75 point? Will that cause the loan now to be unaffordable for you? It could, and that would make the whole transaction fall apart. As I mentioned before, if you co-signed on any loans, those can be issues because those are considered part of your debt. But then there's also unexpected things about the property. What if you do your home inspection and you discover that there is issues that are going to be major repairs on the property? I mean, when you went in and you looked at it, everything looked great. Cosmetically, it was beautiful. But the home inspector uncovered some hidden issues. And now you're looking at those issues, whatever they might be, those some things, and decided that you just don't have the monies to move forward to repair those items. One of the more common ones, depending on the area of our state that you're in, is the foundation. You know, sometimes when we go to look at a home and we go down in the basement, you can't see the foundation walls because there's stuff down there. And during the home inspection, or during that final walkthrough mainly, after the seller has removed everything from the home, you're going to go in and you're going to take a look, and you may see things that are wrong with the foundation that the seller never bothered to disclose. Those things can be very serious things. Perhaps, and I've had this happen to me, you have a disclosure report from the seller that says they do not get water in the basement. And then just before the closing, it happens to be a day after a heavy rain, you go down to the basement and the basement has water in it, or it's flooded, or there's corners where there's puddling or whatever. That may deter you from wanting to move forward with the deal. So there's those some things that can happen at the last minute. Let's take a look at this presentation talking about some of the things that the seller can do to make the transaction fall apart. Now, what you just saw in that presentation is just 10 of the things. There's a number of different things that can go wrong that a seller can do that will make a transaction fall apart. And some of those things, or the something, fall along the lines of no one was prepared for it. I, as a realtor in the business for almost 20 years now, have experienced some situations that caught everybody by surprise. We've had situations where sellers are uncooperative. In other words, in order for the buyer to get the mortgage, the bank is going to send an appraiser out to the home to do an appraisal to see what the value is. And sometimes there's been sellers that don't want to let the appraiser in their house. So how is the appraiser supposed to complete their job if they can't physically see the home, both inside and out? Well, they can go to the town hall, they can pull out statistics, they can look at comparable sales, they can look at the pictures of those comparable sales, and they can extrapolate numbers. But there's nothing like actually getting into the house to make that judgment of where the house's value should fall. I mean, you can have a house from the outside that looks absolutely beautiful. The landscaping is gorgeous. The house is in great shape. The neighborhood is beautiful. All those things going for it. But on the inside, it could need a lot of help. And if the appraiser can't get in there to see that, they might misappraise the house or be too cautious and appraise the house lower than what's needed for the mortgage, and thus the transaction will fall apart. I've had situations where the seller has decided not to sell the house. Everything has gone fine. The transaction is moving along. Appraisal has come in. Home inspection didn't show many problems. Everything is great. The mortgage is in place. The buyer's ready to go. Their monies are all set. They're hiring the moving company. They're getting all ready to close. And the seller decides, for whatever reasons, not to sell the home. In other words, they back out of the deal. Could be a life event that's changed, or it could just be they've had second thoughts. This is why it's so important that the realtor speaks with the seller to prepare them for the things that are going to happen in the near future when they sell their home, to make sure they're on board. One of the somethings that happens with sellers is perhaps the seller is selling their home and they need to close on that sale in order to buy the next home that they plan to move to. What happens if they can't find a home to move to? Well, this is a something. This is a situation where the deal may fall apart because the seller was selling their home so that they can buy a bigger one, a smaller one, move out of state, whatever the motivation may be, and they can't find a place to go. This is one of the conversations that realtors a lot of times will have with sellers when they're listing homes, is they'll ask them the question, what are your plans when the house sells? Are you moving in with a relative temporarily if you're building a home? Are you going on the road and buying an RV? Or are you looking to buy another home to move to? It's very important to have that conversation because that is a situation that can make a transaction fall apart. Now, again, as I mentioned earlier, I've been in this business long enough where I've seen all kinds of some things. Something that surprises me is when a seller doesn't want to go to the attorney and sign the paperwork. They don't say they don't want to sell. They're perfectly capable of going to the attorney and signing the paperwork, but they don't want to sign. Well, you can't close on the house unless the seller signs all the paperwork. So we've seen that happen over the years. Another situation that we've seen is what I mentioned, kind of like what the buyer discovers, where the seller, for whatever reasons, did not disclose to the buyer as required some of the situations with the house. Now, there are some things that are unexpected, and we call these due diligence items, and I like to talk about this because, again, I've experienced it. When a realtor is taking a buyer out and showing them homes, they suggest to the buyer that the buyer research the neighborhood, that they look to see what's going on in the town, what's happening for new construction, where the businesses are, what the schools are like, and so on and so forth. A realtor can help. They can point you in the direction as to where to try to find this information, but they can't really provide the information to you. That's up to you to find out. But at the last minute, I've had transactions fall apart because we're getting ready to close on the home and the buyer discovers that perhaps across the street or down the street, it's been contracted for a major complex to be built. And now this is going to change the look of the neighborhood, change the traffic flow, and so on and so forth. And they're just not acceptable to that, and they'll decide to back out of the transaction. I had a situation where a buyer was going to purchase a home, and they didn't realize that within a half a mile of the home, there was a gun club. Nothing wrong with guns, but they had a shooting range. So on a weekend, you would hear the gunshots going off as people were practicing. And they were nervous about that because they had small children, they had animals, and they were just nervous that there's that kind of activity going on pretty close to where the home was, and they decided to back out of the transaction. The seller never disclosed that there was a gun range in the area. So again, the buyer felt, I don't want to go ahead and purchase this house because A, the seller didn't tell me that, and B, I found out about it last minute and I've decided to break this transaction. There are dozens of ways, much more than I'm mentioning here on the Real Estate Show, that the real estate transaction can fall apart. I mentioned earlier that there are a lot of people that get involved in a real estate transaction, and everyone has to pull their weight and do their own jobs in order to make this happen for the buyer and seller. So of course you have your realtor that's representing you if you're a buyer. You have the listing agent or realtor that's representing the seller. Now you have your attorney and the attorney on the other side, the paralegal on your side, the paralegal on the other side. You have the appraiser for the bank. You have your home inspector. You have coordination of the moving van to move your stuff, or friends and relatives to help you move. There's a lot of different things that are involved in order to make everything go smoothly and to get the transaction to the closing so that you get the keys to the house and can begin living in your new home. Let's take a quick look at this presentation I call Before, and I'll be back with some final comments here on the Real Estate Show. It's important to remember whether you're selling your home or whether you're in a position to be buying a home, preparation is always key. You want to prepare. There are a number of different steps that your realtor can guide you that you need to go through in order to make the transaction come together and be successful. There are so many different ways, there are so many different somethings that can happen during the transaction which may make it not be able to come together. So again, preparation is key. All the little details you need to kind of work through and be prepared for. For a buyer, it's as simple as making sure that your incomes and your debts are all up to date so you can present all that information to your bank to help you get the mortgage. For a seller, it's preparing the home to be on the market, going through the home, making sure that they've already done those things that may need to get done. As a seller, you need to have somebody come in and take a look at the house, perhaps a neighbor, perhaps a friend, perhaps a relative, someone who doesn't live there. Because we all live in our homes for a number of years and we tend to become, for lack of a better word, blind to smells and situations and sounds and so on and so forth, because we live in the home. So by having a set of fresh eyes and ears come in, sometimes it helps you in discussing what things you might want to do before you put your home on the market. And again, that's where your realtor, your listing agent, can come in very handy because they've seen a number of homes and they can go through the home with you and make suggestions to try and make that home inspection that the buyer is going to do run as smoothly as possible. My name is Rick Naples, and this has been the Real Estate Show. I thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.
The Saybrook Fish House in Canton has been serving fresh seafood, chicken, and steak entrees for 34 years, offering 3 cozy dining room settings, a newly renovated pub with craft beer, wine by the glass, specialty cocktails, and a lighter fare menu. Open for lunch and dinner 7 days a week. Reservations accepted for parties of 2 to 42, and gift certificates are also available. The Saybrook Fish House, nestled at the crossroads of Route 44, 202, and 179 in Canton.